The Bible commands us in 1 Peter chapter 3 and verse 15 to be able to give a reasonable defense of our faith. This is the concluding episode in a two-part series on how animals, like kangaroos, got to and from the Ark to faraway countries like Australia. In a larger sense, the question is, how did animals travel from Ararat to regions like Australia? As already seen from the previous episode, the land bridges provided a passage from the Ararat region to other localities. Now, with regard to the kangaroos, as the population of kangaroos built up, they migrated further and further from Ararat until they found themselves in Australia. Young Earth creationists do not propose that the two kangaroos aboard the Ark had to hop all the way to Australia. Rather, over generations, the kangaroo and other creatures migrated in the post-Genesis flood world. The answer has to do with the way that fossils are formed. Fossilization is a very rapid process in which an organism undergoes sudden burial. The Genesis flood provided the bulk of the fossil record because the organisms were rapidly buried by the fast-flowing sediments. Now, to address the question, were those types of conditions available for the kangaroos that perished along the way to Australia? No. And the fact that we do not find kangaroo fossils in places such as Indonesia, which may have been a possible route they took, does not mean that they did not take that route. For instance, it is an undeniable fact that millions of bisons roamed the United States of America, and the fact that we do not find millions of bison fossils does not disprove the existence of bison in America. The fact that some plants and animals are unique to Australia does not mean that these creatures did not establish daughter populations anywhere else. All it means is that Australia was the only place where these creatures, or plants, survived. Kangaroos, for instance, may have established other colonies around the world after the flood, but those other population groups became extinct. One reason that the kangaroos survived in Australia is because marsupials travel faster than placental mammals, because marsupials carry their young in a pouch. Thus, the kangaroos may have reached Australia prior to the placental mammals, and when the sea levels rose again after the flood, the kangaroos became isolated in Australia, and they did not have to compete for resources with all of the other placental mammals. There is also a unique species of palm in Australia called the Livingstonia marinea that has survived in the Palm Valley in Australia. It would not be logical to conclude that the seeds of this tree floated only to this one spot in Australia. One must understand that the climate is drier now than the centuries immediately following the Genesis flood. Thus, this type of palm may have been found all across Australia and even parts of the continent of Africa, but those populations died out due to the fact that the dryness of the Earth's climate has increased. Palm Valley did not become as dried out as the rest of the central Australian climate, and thus the Livingstonia survived there. Many areas that are now desert were not desert post-Genesis flood due to the weather conditions brought about by the flood. The koala could have selected its migratory path based on the fact that the blue gum eucalyptus leaves were flourishing all along that specific passage. Another answer is that the koalas are specialized as a result of a loss of genetic information. What this means is that the koalas that came off the Ark possessed a greater vitality than their modern descendants, which only carry a portion of the original gene pool that the Ark koalas had. Finally, the specialized diet seen in the koala may be the result of an addiction to the chemicals in the eucalyptus leaf, which the young acquire a taste for in their mother's milk. Koalas that are raised by the bottle have been seen to survive on a diet of bread and honey. Many animal specialists, like those of the slow-moving sloth, can be explained by the loss of genetic information. Iguanas have been known to travel on rafts of vegetation produced by storms. Iguanas have traveled hundreds of kilometers in between the Caribbean islands via vegetation mats. Even evolutionary scientists concede that blind snakes, which they claim evolved in India and Madagascar, crossed oceans all the way to Australia, South America, and the Caribbean islands, all by vegetation rafts. The reason why apes are found below human fossils in post-Genesis flood deposits in the African continent is because apes, along with the rest of the animal kingdom, immediately began to dispel all over the earth while people decided to colonize at Babel, as recorded in Genesis 9 and Genesis 11. Thus, ape fossils are found below human fossils because apes arrived in Africa prior to people. I pray that you enjoyed this episode of Genesis Under a Microscope, and that you will subscribe to Christ Jesus Ministries YouTube channel. For more faith-building content, continue to watch the rest of the episodes in this series. See the description. We will also find a study guide on this video's topic that has references to scientific journals for the information presented in this video. Take note of the fact that Christ's children are found all over the earth, and remember, the truth saves.